Chào quý vị đến với chương trình Cận Cảnh của FBNC. Chúng ta đang ở trong những ngày xuân của năm 2014. Xin được gửi lời chúc năm mới vui nhất, phát tài đến với tất cả quý vị. Hôm nay chúng ta có cuộc trao đổi về triển vọng kinh tế của Việt Nam năm 2014. Chúng tôi có một cuộc trao đổi thân mật với ông Tarek Mahmoud, Tổng Giám đốc của ngân hàng ANZ Việt Nam. Xin được giới thiệu với quý vị ông Tarek.
Xin chào, chúc mừng năm mới phát tài.
Hello, Mr. Tarek. Are you phát tài and ready?
We're very excited about the Chinese New Year for the Lunar New Year and what it has, but never enough phát tài. We have to keep hoping for more in the future.
Yeah. I think the bank always go around to find good opportunity, not only for the bank but for every business people.
Correct.
And before we talk about the 2014 Vietnam economy, let's look back the last year the economy. So far, what your most impression about the economy, our economy last year?
I think it was a big achievement this past year because it's the first time in many years that over the last 2 years actually we've had strong stability. I think especially by the State Bank of Vietnam. So you've seen liquidity, you've seen interest rates really drop, you've seen a very stable exchange rate. It's one of the longest periods I think for 10, 12 years that there's not been any major devaluation. And also you're seeing the dollar situation is much more stable. I remember 2 years ago at the same time there was a shortage of dollars in the market, but now there's a lot of liquidity. So I think this past year was a very credible year for the economy in just being stable and not going through the period of boom bust that has damaged, I think, Vietnam's economic credibility in the past. So I think the main achievement, I believe, last year was stability in inflation, in interest rates, as well as in the liquidity in the market, despite the economic challenges the country faced.
You just talk about the currency stability and so on. However, what the main reason here? Who make the good achievement like that? Business or government, or we have to say thank you to the world economy?
I think there's three main factors, I believe. One was actually the State Bank 2.5 years ago put in some much stronger controls on credit growth. And they started classifying banks between the very strong banks like ANZ and those, and then down to the very weak banks. And depending on the strength of the bank was allowed to grow credit. So before that period, banks were just lending really recklessly, to be honest, to many speculative projects, projects that were not based on real business. And it just resulted in a lot of bad lending that happened in the economy. So I think by putting a cap on that, by having a discipline on the credit growth in the market, that of course did impact growth, but at least it impacted a lot of bad growth that was happening. What's now the situation, which we see, is a lot more real investment is happening in the economy, not speculative investment. So I think in the last year in the manufacturing sectors, in areas of real production, areas relating mostly to export at this stage, you're seeing much better investment in those areas. The other area, of course, is the world economy. But it does look, especially with the US consumer, that the world economy is starting to show a bit more positive momentum, despite some concerns over China's slowdown, which I think is overstated. But the main priority for Vietnam is the US spending or not, because a lot of the exports out of Vietnam do end up going to the US consumer. So that's a major area. The third area, I think, is on the domestic demand situation, which definitely is not growing as fast as it was before. And that's partly because of credit growth. It's partly because a lot of state-owned enterprises are not expanding into new businesses that they were doing before. They're starting to wind back to focus on their core business, which of course does impact investment in the economy. So I think those three main reasons is really what's resulted in stability in the market.
And how about the foreign investor? We learned that last year that rising role of M&A, for example, even FDI. Do you have any good view about that?
Yeah, so we see a lot of FDI. I think you have the glamorous FDI, the big electronic companies that invest in Vietnam that generates the headlines. But what many people don't see is actually the more medium-sized FDI that also comes in from Korea, from Taiwan, from Singapore. more medium-sized companies, and that has been significant, even from Japan into this market. So while the big one really is talking about billions of dollars, it's big scale, I think also the more medium-sized companies also offer real value to the economy as they come in. So we see a lot, and what they're pleased with is generally that they're able to have a stable exchange rate. The labor force cost is less than what they were paying perhaps in China or in other markets. And I think their outlook for doing business in Vietnam is much more positive than it was before. But we can't be complacent, because you have other countries like Indonesia, Philippines, etc., who are also trying to attract a lot of the same kind of FDI. But I think Vietnam has got a good position to attract FDI right now. And when we look at it, I don't think we should just look at it as just supporting foreign direct investment. It also supports LDI, local direct investment, because you see a lot of Vietnamese companies benefit because they start supplying or they start buying from some of these foreign companies as well. So it really helps the overall economy. It's not just a foreign investor.
We got, I think, a lot of good news. But so far, any bad news you think that even the international bank, when you met, you talk, you complain about it?
I think what worries us a little bit is more looking forward. I mean, last year I think a lot of progress was made on the asset management company being set up to try and address the NPLs in the market. But what was probably disappointing last year is the pace of reform of the SOE sector, the equitization process or IPO process of either the major companies or even the middle-sized SOEs still dominated. A lot of the areas of the economy are still dominated by SOEs, which can suffocate the private sector. You also see very successful examples in the last 15 years of SOEs who have managed to transform themselves, and they're now run on a very efficient, very corporate basis. So Vietnam has shown that they've done it in the past, but for whatever reason in the last 2 years that slowed down significantly. Now the tone is moving forward, that process will start picking up again as the pressure to move on to make the economy more efficient, it gets more intense. So already you're seeing some IPOs being announced for early next year. So I'm hopeful that in 2014 we'll see more progress. But I'd say in 2013, one of the main challenges remains the SOE sector. The other main challenge I see is in the domestic banking sector in Vietnam. You see some banks that clearly understand what to do with NPLs. They're taking the provision, they're working with the asset management company. They're not going to show profit this year. They accept that this is a tough year. And then you see some banks really that don't seem to recognize that. They don't accept to take provision because they want to show profit. And until they implement Circular 2 next year, which improves the definition of NPL, that means those banks are allowed to not really take the provision. But so that, I think, is an area in 2014 I'd like to see more progress on, that banks really recognize if they have bad debt, because it will allow them to get healthier faster. It's like if you have sickness and you don't recognize you're sick and you keep trying to work every day when you need to rest a little bit. And that's what some of the banks need to do right now.
Thank you, Mr. Tareq. I think we will continue to talk about the unfinished agenda for Vietnam economy next year. And now we have the practice. Cảm ơn quý vị. Chúng ta đã có cuộc trao đổi về những nét chính nhìn lại kinh tế Việt Nam trong năm 2013. Chúng ta sẽ trở lại cuộc trao đổi những vấn đề mà chúng ta sẽ phải đương đầu phải giải quyết trong năm 2014. Rất vui gặp lại quý vị trong chương trình Cận cảnh FBNC về đề tài kinh tế Việt Nam năm 2014. Thưa quý vị, chúng ta đã có cuộc trao đổi với ông Tareq Mahmoud, Tổng Giám đốc của Ngân hàng ANZ Việt Nam. Ông Tareq cũng nguyên là chủ tịch của nhóm các ngân hàng nước ngoài tại Việt Nam. Mr. Tareq, we learned that you are also current or the former of the chairman of the International Banker Club in Vietnam.
Correct.
And your club have a very fruitful meeting with our Prime Minister. In the meeting, what the most important matter your banker raised to our government?
Yeah, so it was actually with the Prime Minister, Governor, the Deputy Governors and other banks, and it was a good forum. And I was speaking on behalf of the Banking Working Group, which is all the international banks in Vietnam that are part of our forum. And we made 3 strong recommendations to the government on what should happen in the year ahead. One was in the area of governance, of the transparency of banks in risk management, making sure that the state bank continues to issue new guidelines to keep upgrading the quality of governance in the banking system and transparency in the banking system. And there's clear international standards called Basel II, which Vietnam's intending to implement by 2015. So we really encourage that that process goes through by 2015. The second recommendation we made was with regards to the asset management company. As you know, the asset management company is very active in taking over the bad debts from many banks. And over the next 12 months, they expect to take in dollars about $8 to $9 billion worth of bad debts out of the bank's balance sheet into the asset management company. And what our encouragement was to make sure that asset management company is very clear, very transparent in what assets it has, and what is the process around tax, around legal, to dispose or sell those assets or transfer those assets, to make sure for the economy as well as for the investors that it's very clear what the process is. Because I think the process has started with the asset management company, but the next steps are very important. We also encourage that the asset management company should not sell the assets very quickly, because if you rush it, you don't get the best price for Vietnam's economy. The third recommendation, which is probably the most critical, is there's been a lot of work now done on NPL Circular 2 coming in June 2014. But the challenge now we can see in the next 2 or 3 years is capital. The banking system in Vietnam won't have enough capital to support growth in the future, because they need to take provision on all the bad loans that happened before, and they need to amortize the bond every year. And I think the question on capital, if I was the CEO of a local bank, what are my options? What can I do to raise capital? I can either try and find capital locally in Vietnam, but what if I want to attract a foreign investor? It could be a bank, it could be a fund manager, it could be private equity, it could be a number of different sources. But at the moment, the rules about what is allowed and what's not allowed seem to be more on a case-by-case basis. And I think the situation will move a lot faster if clear rules are set on what, as a local CEO, am I allowed to consider when it comes to raising capital, because that will have to happen in the next 2 or 3 years.
About the restructuring of the bank, that of course we need the capital, we need asset management chain, but how about the human resources? Someone told me, why not local bank in Vietnam? They can hire the CEO, foreign CEO, to run the bank. You think it's a good resolution?
It's possible. I mean, for me, my perspective is I don't really look at between local or foreign. I think it's really important you find the right CEO for that kind of role. Now, there's been examples in 2 banks that I'm aware of where the foreigner was a CEO or is a CEO. So it does happen. But also, is the CEO really got the right level of power, right level of authority, able to work in this economy? So you really have to find the right type of CEO for any job, and whether it's foreign or local, I don't think matters as much as the character and what type of leadership is brought by that CEO.
Also, another area, that the SOE reform. People also raise a question that we need a very good CEO to run the SOE, just not only change the restructure.
Correct, yeah.
How about your view?
I think it's a journey. I think if you look at the history, you can understand why things are the way they are. So where it's really government employees being moved around to do different jobs. Yeah, so you can see why that happens. But you've also seen that that can change. Even if you look at some countries, the head of the state bank or the central bank is a foreigner. Even if you look in